Hey, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Evan Owens, the co-founder and head poobah at Reboot Recovery. Evan, how you doing today?
I am awesome. Excited to dig into some good stuff today. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Completely. Love having you here. I actually had the good fortune to go through Reboot Recovery when I think it was Reboot Combat Recovery, and also got the chance to teach the course before I got deployed to the Middle East. So very familiar with your work. I know you're doing good things, and you've got like a disgusting amount of volunteers nationwide. We're going to get to that in a little bit, talk about volunteers and stuff. But give us a little background on you and your wife and why you guys started Reboot.
Yeah, it's a non-conventional story, actually. When you look at most nonprofit stories of, especially within the military space. But short version is I was the CEO at a software development company when my wife, she's a doctor for occupational therapy, she was working at Vanderbilt University and she got recruited to start a mild traumatic brain injury, to be part of a team starting a mild traumatic brain injury clinic on Fort Campbell by the Department of Defense. And so in a matter of about 2 weeks, we basically packed up everything, moved our family up closer to Fort Campbell because the commute from where we were living south of Nashville would have been like an hour and 40 minutes, which is, non-starter. And so I was driving to Nashville every day. And during this time, she would have these conversations with her clients, with her patients, that made her realize there was a gap between, where mental and physical sort of therapies were taking over, that there was three gaps. There was one, there was nothing that was peer led, right? So the nothing that was sort of, hey, I've lived through this and now I can help lead you out of it. There was nothing that way for them. Number two is there was nothing that was spiritual or faith-based at all. That was kind of void of that. And then third, there was nothing that was sort of anonymous care that was there in the backyard where all these veterans were living, just right here in Fort Campbell, where we live. And so we invited people over to our living room and cooked up some lukewarm spaghetti. And that accidentally was the first Reboot meeting. And really, it was just a conversation where we just asked lots of questions. I learned a lot. And this continued for many, many weeks. And every meeting really drew my heart and passion closer to that. And I remember a quote one time that something about, like, it was talking about the power of a new affection, that when you love something a lot, but when you start to love something more, you'll stop loving the other thing as much. And I think for me, I started loving the work that we were doing with these families and the time we were spending them and the relationships that we were building and the friendships we were forging and all of that. And I started to love that so much that eventually I knew that was going to be where I needed to spend my time. The problem is that, you're running a company and making good money and you have dual income and no kids pretty much, or, one kid, I think at the time. And that's hard to leave. And so to kind of bring the story to a head, what we began doing is basically all week long we'd work. And then on the weekends, I'd travel to military bases, standing up Reboot Combat Recovery. Back then was the only program we had. We only had military, standing up these groups on the weekends. And we did that for 4 years. And so we really, sort of had all the core model in place to some degree before we ever left our full-time jobs. But there came a point at the end of 2014 that it was really clear it was either I was going to stop, pushing the nonprofit play or, that initiative, or I was going to leave my position as a CEO. And the answer was really clear. It didn't come in the way I thought it would, but it came. And so I left in May of 2015. I stepped down. My wife stepped down. We went from dual income, no kids, to, no income, 3 kids over a period of the next few years, and laid it all on the line for it. And it has been the greatest journey, other than, getting married and having kids. In terms of what this world has to offer, it's probably been the greatest journey of my life, for sure.
That's definitely an amazing startup story. It's hard to give up being DINK. That was one of my favorite acronyms when I was talking to young couples. Dual income, no kids.
Yep.
I mean, there's not much better than DINK.
Right.
You have money flowing in. You don't have a lot of bills. You can kind of do what you want with your time.
That's right.
And then you realize that the trade-off is very worth it. Kiddos are just fun, crazy balls of wonderfulness, and you love them and you
Energy.
hate them
Yeah.
and you love them again. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But, kudos
Yep.
to making the what might seem to a lot of people to be the hard decision to give up that kind of lifestyle to do a life of service. But when you're in that moment, it almost doesn't seem like there's even an option.
Right.
That's just the thing you're going to do, and that's just how it is, and you're okay with it. And as someone that's gone through and taught your program, I'm very happy that you guys made that decision.
Thank you,
I've
man.
seen the change. I've seen the revolution right before my eyes in a few small groups. And you go from people not willing to talk at all to people kind of grunting, "Ugh, yeah, oh yeah, yeah," to people having a thing or two to say. And then at the end of the 12 weeks, I don't know if it's still 12 weeks, but at the end of the
It is.
12 weeks, everyone's friends. Everyone is so invested in everyone else in the group. They have a positive outlook, and it's just an amazing transformation. So happy to have been part of that. But
Yeah.
it's gets me every time. And you guys are now like the largest faith-based trauma recovery program in existence. Is that right?
I think in terms of number of people served and volunteers, that's probably true. I mean, there's a lot of great nonprofits out there, so I wouldn't pretend to know everything they're doing. But in terms of a peer-led movement, I would say, yeah, in terms of just sheer reach, then yes. And I think that's important to point out. Where I'm not talking about people reached. I'm not talking about people that received a flyer or a book that we maybe gave them at some conference. I'm talking about people that actually went through our courses. We've had over 13,000 people go through our courses, and we have 700 or 800 volunteers every week that devote 5 to 10 hours per week to facilitating these groups. And that type of impact has taken a decade to build. We really started this in 2011 in our living room was our first meeting, and now here we are in 2021, a decade later. So pretty, it's not an overnight success, not like boom, overnight we reached all these people because we got $2 million from some wealthy guy and all of a sudden we're this thing. I mean, we've been at it a long time.
No, it's nice to see that. And I've talked to a lot of startup founders, and they just have this idea and they want to start and they go with it and they struggle. But I love your story that it was much more organic, and you
Right.
tried a couple things and you see where it went, and then you build it and you developed it. And you said you started with just Reboot Combat Recovery, which was really just military or veteran based. And then you started to include first responders, but now you have Trauma Reboot because you're not wanting to miss anybody. You're not wanting to
Yeah.
have, a gap out there where people need the help and they can't get it because they don't fit into a certain silo. What was the change in
Right.
the decision of going through something like that?
Yeah, it too was somewhat gradual. I think by 2017, we had clarified our vision that we wanted to be a trauma healing organization, and that is who we were. People used to always ask, well, are you a veteran service organization? Are you a religious organization? What are you? And I would always say we're a trauma healing organization first and foremost. Yes, we serve veterans, And then when the Pulse nightclub shooting, some of your listeners might remember that down in Orlando, we actually had a military group down the street from that. And it was during that a few police officers who actually had responded to the nightclub shooting showed up, and they said, look, we don't know where else to go. We saw the sign out front of your building. Can we join? Because we don't know who to talk to, but we know what we just witnessed probably looked a little bit like combat. Can we talk to you guys who have seen war? And that leader called me that next week and said, Evan, we got to do something for first responders. And we didn't really have a deep background in that area. And so, as the coolest and maybe craziest part of our story goes, there was a book that my wife had been given way back in 2010 from a guy called the Combat Trauma Healing Manual, written by Chris and Renella Adsit. And it was while we read that book that Jenny and I first got the idea of becoming what Chris calls a bridge person. A bridge person is a person who lays down their life in love so that somebody can get from where they are to where they need to be. And I remember telling Jenny, I don't have the degrees that you have. I don't have the acumen. I don't have the military experience, but what I do have is a heart full of love, and I'm willing to lay down my life, whatever that means. Let me do that. I can do that. I can love people well. And that was the origin of Reboot, was let's just love people and see what happens. And let's be authentic and in loving, trusting relationships. And so all that being said, is Chris Ranella had a deep background in first responder expertise and trauma. And so if you can imagine, way late in 2016, 2017, I reached out to them, and it turns out they actually ended up merging with our nonprofit organization. We joined forces, and now they're part of my team. And so to work with the people who first inspired us, to have them part of our team, is truly a blessing for us. And that's when we launched our first responder curriculum. And I know this is a long answer, sorry, but just, I want to point out too, we didn't just reskin the military curriculum. We started fresh, and the same thing's true with this trauma reboot. We can talk a little bit about why we branched out from military and first responders into the general public if you'd like. But that's kind of, you said organically, that's kind of how it happened, right? Is we knew we wanted to be a trauma healing organization, which kind of defined our true north.
Look, this is a podcast. There's no time limit. We can do whatever we want. So if you have a long answer, you just feel free to go ahead and grip that and hold on to it and ride that into the evening if you want to, right? There's no rules here in podcast land.
All right.
Nice. I love that you say, let's just love people and see what happens. I'm active duty Navy, still soon to be a veteran. And there's about 53,000 plus veteran type nonprofit organizations in the US. And not a lot of them work together. I'm not sure why that is. There's some squabbling and some infighting. And there's some people like, well, you shouldn't be doing this, or you should be doing that, or whatever else. And I had a friend of mine interested in starting up something, and that's, in the works and coming down the pipeline. And something that popped in my head almost immediately was like, well, you're not a veteran. And it lasted for about 2 seconds. And I was like, well, Gary Sinise isn't a veteran. And you better believe the Gary Sinise Foundation. They're doing amazing work. They're raising tons of money. They're getting tons of eyeballs on what's going on with military and veterans. And he's not a veteran. So why did my immediate reaction be like, well, you're not a veteran, you can't do this? That's not true. And you're another example of not being a veteran and still being able to have that impact, that love, that desire. I had another guest, Phil Randazzo, which is one of my first 10 episodes. I got to fly out to Vegas actually last week and meet Phil in person. I interviewed him when I was in Bahrain, him and Dave Berlin. I flew out to Vegas and I was like, you guys are both here. I want to meet you guys. And Dave's a veteran, but Phil is not. And he runs American Dream U and does a great job as one of our, Patriot partners, someone that never served, that has a big heart for this stuff. And you don't have to be a veteran to have an impact in the veteran space. You don't.
Right. Yeah. No, I'd say for people listening who struggle with, for business leaders who struggle with feeling like they don't have a seat at the table. I think we've all been part of those networks where when we show up, we feel this need to prove ourselves. We feel this need to fit in, to belong. And it's really hard because a lot of times the room where we are known is not the room we want to be in anymore. We want to be in the room where, this next tier, quote unquote, will accept us and tell us that we're enough. And we seek that validation. And I think for me, I would say, one, I was forced by working with the military. I mean, I remember in the earliest days going to the PX during lunchtime, still in my business clothes, my suit, and just going table to table in the PX, inviting people to Reboot. And they were all in uniform in the middle of their workday. And I mean, nobody liked me. Nobody wanted to talk to me, but it forced me to humble myself and to say, you may not care who I am, and that's okay, but like, I care who you are. And but with that, I just wanted to point out, I'd say the biggest hurdle for me leading Reboot, if you ask me what's the hardest part about it, I would say it's what you just described. It is a sense that I am not the right person to lead this. And people, when I start a conversation with people, even if I had served as a cook in the military, I check the box and they trust me fully. But because I'm not, there's this sense of, well, how could you possibly do this? Are you a pastor? No. Are you a clinician? No. Are you a veteran? No. So then basically you don't check one of those three boxes. And because of that, I'd say that's the hardest thing, is that I feel like a lot of times I start at like -5 and I work my way to proving myself to 0. Whereas a lot of people, they start at like +1 just because they served in the military for 2 years. or 4 years or whatever it was, and they can move up from there. And I think that's something that I wrestle with on the military side specifically, not so much on the trauma reboot side or on the first responder side. They don't seem to be quite as particular in that way.
Mhm.
But I think that what you just alluded to is something that I believe holds back the veteran population in our country. And I'll say a couple things that are pretty strong opinions here. One, pretty much if I ever hear a veteran say, well, we're a veteran, nobody really cares about us, I basically lose my mind. And the reason is that I don't know if you can name another population in our country that actually has more people trying to help and more benefits available to them than the veteran population. And if you don't believe me, study some other populations who are disadvantaged. I mean, it's insane the lack of programming for some of those niche populations. Talk to me about, 25-year-old males who were sexually abused as children and now just have to figure it out in life and didn't serve in the military. There's no programs for them. There's no resources for them. There's no money. There's no discounts at Lowe's. There's nothing. It's just tough crap. You live through life and you got to deal with it. And so I think the first thing is that I hear a lot of veterans say, well, only veterans can help veterans, which basically rules out 99.6% of the population. Since only 0.4% of the eligible population served in this war, you're basically saying 99.6% of the world can't help me and doesn't care about me. What a limiting view of reality. What a limiting population. The truth is, a lot of people want to help and they love you and they're grateful. They just don't know exactly what to do and how to help all the time. But they want to. And I would just say that's I hope that the veteran community will begin to open its aperture a little bit and realize there's a lot more allies out there than what it may seem. Now, does patriotism and veteran culture get used? I mean, and get, sort of this, people proclaim to be something, I support the vets when really maybe they don't. Yes, absolutely. That happens with any population. But my experience has been, and I can point to my volunteer base and say there's a lot more people who are grateful and who want to help than people who don't.
I like that you brought that up. I've been doing a little bit of research about this because, 53,000 organizations dedicated to helping veterans at some capacity. That seems like a big number.
Right.
And for context, there's about, 200,000 some odd individuals that get out of the military every year. And there's about
Right.
200 some odd thousand people that are diagnosed with breast cancer every year, and about 200 some odd thousand people diagnosed with prostate cancer this year. Conversely, there's like on Charity Navigator, I think there's like 5,000 some people dedicated to breast cancer, and I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people that groups dedicated to prostate cancer. Listed on Charity Navigator, there's like 27,000. There's more than 5 times the amount of organizations that are created, developed to help the veteran population. And if you look at other websites, you see something on 53,000 plus. 53,000 is the number I've got in my head from a few years ago. I'm assuming it's changed. I don't know if it went up, if it went down or whatever. My fact checker friends will come, shake their finger at me later or whatever. But
Right.
there's so many people dedicated to trying to make it better for the veterans. I mean, you go through boot camp and they completely change the way that you operate as a person. They completely change who you listen to, how you do things. You're operating for a better mission. You're doing things largely the same as everyone else around you on purpose. And then depending on what service is, they train you to go out and pull the trigger when other people are in the site, which is just an astronomically hard thing to ask someone to do. Like you have to be trained to do that. And then you get put back in the civilian population and they've removed all the structure you had, all the forced not forced camaraderie, but you lose the team that you had, you lose the support that you had, you lost the people telling you what to do in the structure of that life and the connection. And no longer is it cool for you to go around killing people. And they're like, here, go back into society. Good luck. And so it's amazing that we have so many organizations, people dedicating to making it better. I wish they would work better with each other, but it's nice to see people like Phil Randazzo and Gary Sinise and Evan and Jenny Owens, who are not veterans, working hard to really work against a systemic problem that we really don't have, a solidified solution yet. And I'm sure someone's going to ding me on solidified solution, but whatever.
No, you're right. And I think that, it's interesting when people ask me sort of, well, what qualifies me? I used to say something kind of cheeky. I'd say like, nothing, if you would like to lead the organization, step on up, man, go ahead, take the job. I used to say something kind of sassy like that. And now I actually I respect the question. And I think they mean the question from a place of love. And so now I say, at the end of the day, there's not too many people who devoted almost 5 years of their life to sitting in rooms with combat veterans, talking to them and listening to them talk about the trauma of war. There's not too many people in the world who devoted 5 years of their life to listening. And we did. I mean, for 5 years, I sat with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who had seen the worst atrocities of war, and they chose to share them with me. And as I listened to them, and as I would ask open-ended questions, what's funny is they told me what was helping, right? They helped. A lot of times as we begin to process externally, we actually start sort of unpacking our own junk, and I think that there were some themes that just early on, I think for me, that I started to see. And so if you look at our writing now and everything that we're doing, it is still very much founded in that 5 years of research and study, that 5 years of qualitative sitting with people. And even now, a big chunk of my time is spent listening to people's stories and sitting with them and just absorbing their experience and working up the courage to have empathy for them, to not just have sympathy, but to actually have empathy to say, I want to understand what it was like for you in that period of time. Help me understand that, because I've not lived through that particular type of trauma, but tell me. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes some tough skin, and it takes a lot of patience. And I think the theme that I have seen probably most consistently over time is that people believed that their experiences of trauma were just trash in their life that they needed to get rid of, that there was this dark season, this terrible era in their life that was worth nothing, that it was useless to them. And I think that what we all wish in our heart of hearts, no matter if you're a veteran, first responder, or anyone else, I think we all wish that the hardships of our life instantly would produce something good. Like, wouldn't that be great if like every time we went through a bad day, we instantly saw the magic dust that came from it? But that's not the case. A lot of us wait months, years, decades before we see the fruit from that pain that we went through. But I think that this quest to say, no, I'm not going to view this as trash anymore. I'm going to view it as recyclable material, something that can be repurposed for meaning in my life, for meaning in other people's lives. Not that it was caused for that purpose, not that it was but that now it can be recycled for good. And I think when we think about recycling our trauma, think about regular recycling. When an object that seems like waste, it's used up, it seems no good anymore, is recycled, it doesn't just benefit me, it benefits a lot of people, because it creates toothbrushes and new cups and new types of materials, and we all benefit from that experience. And that's what I see happening in reboot groups across the country, is people are recycling their pain, they're recycling that trauma and giving it purpose, giving it new meaning. And when we do that, that's the foundation of hope. That's where this hope comes from. And I think for me, once I tasted seeing that recycling process in a person's life and in their heart, that's all that I want to see. That's it, man. I want to see people take their pain and recycle it for something beautiful. And that's the reboot process. And that's what qualifies me, is a love for doing that. And I'd say to listeners here who are thinking about starting their own nonprofits, we have a lot of veterans who think about going into social work or something of that nature for a career. And that's great. I want to encourage you to do that. And I want to say, do whatever it is you think you want to do for a job or a nonprofit that's missional. Do it for free for about a year first, because if you don't enjoy doing it, or if you don't do it well for free, you're not going to do it any better or enjoy doing it anymore when you're paid to do it. And I think that what we had seen previously is there were people in these professions who they may have been, I'm going to get a little preachery here, but they might have been appointed to those roles, but they weren't anointed to be able to do those jobs. They didn't have the gifting to do that skill. And so they did harm, right? Because they had a degree that they just got. And all of you listening have probably had that experience, right? Where you've sat across from someone, and you're like, this person's not in the right seat. And so I always encourage people, do it for a year for free. And if you love doing it, and if if you're good at it, think for me, I loved guiding people towards helping them recycle their pain. And I think I was pretty good at it. And so that's my driving force now.
Mhm. I love that you bring up the imagery of fruit. When you take something like an apple seed and you plant it and
Right.
you cultivate it, you water it, you give it sunshine, and eventually it sprouts. And then over time, many seasons, it grows into a sapling and then a tree and then it flowers. And the very last thing
Producing the
that
fruit.
is produced is the fruit. It
Right.
takes the longest to get there. And I love the imagery of that. And I love what that looks like. And it's interesting you mentioned that there's wrong people in the wrong seat. I actually had someone that I went to see on a military base that was a retired military officer of some variety who got their counseling and were able to prescribe medication. And it turns out that they prescribed me something at a much higher dose than I needed. And I had an adverse reaction and actually made all my
Oh,
symptoms
wow.
worse. Actually made all my
Wow.
symptoms worse. And I found out later, much later, from a friend of mine who went to see this person and was able to get them to disclose exactly what was going on. It turns out they were getting kickbacks from a company for prescribing their medication, and they actually
Wow.
took pleasure in creating more of that pain. And the friend of mine actually got this person removed, their license revoked, and then fired,
Good.
which is
Good.
wonderful. But I can't believe that I was one of the people that went through that. And when I was having anxiety and panic attacks, and he prescribed something, that I took it for probably about 3 weeks before I about lost my mind and
Yeah.
just decided to stop taking it, which is fortunate because I'm imagined that not everyone was able to come to that conclusion.
Right.
It ended up doing some real damage, not
Right.
only to me and my career and my health, but I can't imagine how many people that he did that same thing to. I know Jim Collins talks about From Good to Great, how important it is to have the right people on the bus. And
Right.
when you're building and cultivating an organization such as you have, and you've done a fantastic job, that you found a way to get 800 plus volunteers to come back each and every week to help push your programs, which is just mind boggling because most people have a hard time getting 8 people to show up ever, ever at all in the slightest. Like,
Yeah.
what do you guys do that was done differently or cultivated differently or programmatically different that actually kept people coming back for more and actually giving more and more and more time over the years?
I don't know exactly how to compare and contrast with what someone else has done just because I haven't seen that. And so the short answer is I'm not exactly sure why what we did worked. I know that there are a few DNA characteristics that I believe have been critical into making that work. But I'm not sure if I was to go someplace else that I could instantly recreate it. I'm not sure. I don't know for sure, but I think that a couple of the DNA elements, and this is for everybody who's leading out there as well. Early on, Jenny and I had a crossroads decision to make. We were helping all these people in Fort Campbell. All these people were getting help, and they were healing, and they were taking that healing and now paying it forward to other people. That was happening. And we had a choice. We had an opportunity, actually, even a donor that came. What if we built a center of healing right here in Fort Campbell? People who were hurting could fly in and spend some time with Evan and Jenny, and we'd be able to help them and then send them on their way. And that would have been a fine model. A lot of organizations do that. Nothing wrong with that. It's a great idea. But for us, I think Jenny and I we felt like there was a lot more Evan and Jenny's out there than just us. We didn't feel like we were special or like we had some super duper unique gifting or education that other people couldn't do what we were doing. We felt like anybody could be a bridge person and we could teach them how. And so from the get-go, Reboot wasn't about what Evan and Jenny were or could do. It was about what other people could do with a little bit of training.
Mhm.
And that model from the get-go, we put an emphasis on replication of leaders. We put an emphasis on promoting the local leader and downplaying our involvement. Jenny and I, to this day, we could go to almost any Reboot group in the country and hardly anybody would know who we were. Hardly anybody. And that is because their local leader is the hero of the group. Their local leader is the face of Reboot. That's it. Because that person's the one who can love them. I can't love all these people. I don't know them. I've never met them, but their local leader can love them in a non-clinical way. They're not loving them because they're paid to be a peer support specialist or something like that necessarily. They're there because for no other reason than because they care. And there's something magical and healing about that when that starts to happen. And when people like yourself, who led a course, who give of their time, that speaks different than when you walk into a clinician who is billing insurance for your time. It just, something changes in the dynamic between me and you. If I know you're here and you're sacrificing of time with your family, time you could be watching football, time you could be working out at the gym, time you could do whatever it is you enjoy doing, but instead you're here with me. And that breaks a wall down. You know what I mean? It changes things. So I think that's the first thing, is we made it about what other people could do. Number two is we empowered the local leader. And the third thing that we did is we put a heavy emphasis and investment on training systems. Since day one, John Dale from my team has taken what I envisioned for a training model, and he has made it so much greater and far beyond than anything I could have ever imagined. I mean, our training system for our leaders is this short, intensive training followed by ongoing coaching. And coaching now has become the backbone of our organization's volunteer movement. I mean, every leader will talk to one of our coaches. I mean, it's just this incredible system. But our training, it's not about putting some huge binder together and making a person go through a 40 or 50 hour training to then certify them. That's not what it's about. For us, it's about giving them the essential tools they need to do the core role at Reboot, which is lead and facilitate our course. And I think because of that training gives people super clear expectations on what we're asking from them. And that's the way you take care of your volunteers. Most organizations, people don't volunteer because they feel like they're writing a blank check with their time. They feel like once I volunteer a little, I'm on your list and you're going to call me all the time. And I don't know if you're going to ask me to do some boring office work or if you're going to treat me like a warm body in an event, whatever it is. But our volunteers, they're not just manpower to us. They are the mission. And that is significantly different than I believe a lot of the organizations I've volunteered for. They treat me like manpower. I might as well be security. I might as well be, you know what I mean? I set up tables, tear down tables. Nothing wrong with that. Again, not judging that. But the people who volunteer for us, these are not just people who I'm using as they could be anybody. These are people who I believe were specifically designed. I believe they had a special calling in their life to step forward and love veterans, first responders, or others who have gone through trauma. And I'm going to show them how to do that. I'm going to equip them with our training to do that. That's a pretty awesome relationship. That's a great way to start a conversation with a volunteer, as opposed to, we need 20 volunteers to, fold napkins for our gala this Thursday night. Hear the difference?
I don't even know how to follow that up. Evan, you've got me.
Yeah. But I think but you ask why is it people have trouble getting aid? I think it's a lot of times because they undervalue what volunteers can do.
Yes.
And with our model, though, it lends itself towards deeply invested volunteers, right? The model itself does. But beyond that, I think we believe that there's a volunteer out there who is exactly like Jenny and I are, who they could be responsible for starting 20 or 50 or 100 Reboot locations in the country because of their word of mouth network, because of their effort. Like, that person's out there, just like we were. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful part about it is we give people the room to grow into that. And it's pretty cool, because I don't know who gets more out of it. I think the participants get a lot out, but I think the leaders get the most.
Well, I've done both ends of that, and I definitely am leaning towards the leader getting the most feeling out of it. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit, and you actually
That's right. Reagan said that.
Yeah, and when you actually value the people that are contributing. That's one of the big things that I've seen nonprofits kind of writ large is mishandling of volunteers, because you've got the people that and napkins got to get folded. I understand, right?
Nothing wrong with that.
One of the examples I go back to frequently is an advertising exec that's on the board of a nonprofit, and he's not asked to create some kind of campaign or use his magic and his, zone of genius. He's
Right.
asked to like design a flyer. And I
Right.
was sitting in on this meeting, and my face, oh man, I'm great at the poker table, but in the boardroom, my face is like, no, exactly what I'm thinking. My
What are you
face is like,
doing? Yeah,
why would you,
exactly.
why would you do this? And a friend that invited me to sit in on it kind of as an advisor, he's like, so what'd you think? I was like, well, most of the board meeting went, pretty standard, this, that, and the other. I was like, but you're going to have a problem. And he kind of looked at me. He's like, what? A problem? Where? I was like, that ad exec, that the head of the marketing firm. Like, yeah. I was like,
Right.
you guys asked him to make you a flyer. Did you
Right.
mean to walk up and slap him in the face, or and then throw your drink at him, or was that
Right.
unintentional? He's like, what are you
Hmm.
talking about? I was like, that is his baby, his zone of genius. He's built that thing from the ground up. And you said, hey, make me an origami ring out of $1 bill, please. Don't use any
Yeah.
of your magic, your genius, your years of experience, your expertise, or your real passion for what you do. Just give me some BS and that'll be great. And he still kind of didn't get it. I
Yeah.
was like, let me know when he resigns from the board. And again, my friend was, I'm not sure what you're talking about. It wasn't 3 weeks and that board member resigned.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think and it is interesting, talking about all this with empowering board members, empowering people, whatever. I mean, great board members are hard to find. So nonprofit leaders, if you guys are listening out there, I think it's 86% of nonprofit leaders polled this past year said that their boards were ineffective. Right. So, I mean, if you struggle with mobilizing your board, you are not alone. It is extremely difficult, and it's something that we still struggle with. Believe it or not, we work great with leaders and members, but we still struggle to make sure we get the right board members in the right seats. I think we're doing better and better, but we still work at that. But I also think there's something that shifted, and this is a little bit off topic, but I think there's something that's shifting in the nonprofit space over the past 5 years that I've seen, and it really concerns me. And it's something that I'm not sure what vehicle I should use to write about it, because it sounds like I'm judging someone, and I'm not. I'm judging us as an industry. And so I want to just speak. I imagine there's a lot of nonprofit leaders who listen to this, right? I mean, that's a lot of people. And um, I think that it used to matter a lot, and maybe it's been this way longer than maybe even it's changed this way over 15 years. But I think how good you were at the mission, how well you executed the mission really mattered. It really mattered. And I fear that it doesn't matter much anymore. What matters now is how influential the CEO is in terms of fame. And I think we've moved to this model where we value influence over substance. We value charisma over content. And we've shifted to this place where people will start a nonprofit. Some celebrity will start a nonprofit. Everybody and their brother will throw all the money at that organization. And yet the person who started it actually has no experience at all in the space. Like they have no proven model except for the fact that they're influential, they're famous. And I see this happening more and more lately, where God love our celebrities, I love celebrities, but where instead of them throwing their weight behind a solution that's already working that needs more gas, they start their own thing to further promote their brand. And this concerns me, because what it's done is it's confused the people who need help, because it's launched multiple solutions. And what's happening is sometimes I used to believe that the organizations who did the best work would raise the most money. That's not true. The organizations who are the best at self-promotion raise the most money. The ones who have the right story that fits the narrative. Their mission could be total crap. It doesn't actually matter anymore, right? Donors, I don't think necessarily have, as long as the story is there, we don't look at the data, we don't study the model, we don't really understand the process. As long as the story is there, as long as there's a celebrity that's going to give us what we feel is that warm feeling, if we got to rub elbows with such and such, we're going to put our money there. And I see this happening more and more. And I'm fortunate I get to work with some, kind of celebrity culture people. And others of them have stated the same to me, that they've decided they're not going to start their own thing. They're going to put the weight of their celebrity behind something else. And I think that is becoming more and more rare. I think that is changing. And even in my role as an author and a speaker, whatever, people are constantly wanting me to puff myself up and figure out, how do I build a brand around Evan and Jenny? How do we make them a brand? How do we make them a caricature of who they really are? How do we make them high levels of influence? How do we make them more famous? When, if you think about Reboot's model, our focus has always been on us being less famous and the local leader being more famous. And so it's contrary to how we built the model, right? And so that's a struggle for us. That's something that we're wrestling with right now. We're trying to figure out, how do we come forward as a content creator? How do we come forward without focusing on influence over substance? And I think that's hard. I think a lot of you nonprofit leaders are probably facing this too, which is, you feel like you have to be this famous person on social media all the time now. And it seems like that can almost matter more than the actual mission you're doing. And maybe I'm the only one that struggles with that, but sometimes that's something I wrestle with: is, should I be focusing more on influence and marketing, or should I be focusing more on the mission? Because it feels like when I focus on mission, people don't notice as much. The people we serve do, but the people who pay the bills don't. And I think that's something that I think a lot of nonprofit leaders are wrestling with right now. And I think it's harder than it's ever been to lead like that. I think it's hard.
It's super tough, right? I read Upstream by Dan Heath, and they talk about solving the problem really before it becomes the problem. But here's the deal: if we find a way to stem suicide, to slow it down,
Yeah.
and the number that's advertised as 22 a day, whether or not that's a real number, no
Right.
one, we really don't know right now. But let's
Right.
say all of a sudden it's advertised that it's 16. So we're doing great in the mission, right? That many 6 less people a day kill themselves. Wonderful. But that also means that there's going to be less participation in programs. So it looks like, as nonprofits, we're doing less. And if we're doing less, does that mean we get less funding?
Right.
It's this weird
Right.
dichotomy between solving the problem and being the
And
hero.
dude, I feel like the last 18 months for me as an executive, I've been in one form or another. I've been an executive since 2010, 2011. And the last 18 months, I have to say, have probably been the hardest to lead an organization through that I've ever led through. It's just, you're constantly adapting. You're constantly trying to figure out the next funding thing. Your events have been canceled. Nothing's happening by accident. The only thing that seems that, it used to be, you'd be at an event, you'd shake hands with somebody, and boom, overnight, they become your next big donor, or they become the next big leader, or whoever it is. None of that's happened, right? Nothing's happened by accident. Everything that happens only because it was in the outcome of a very intentional strategy, which is exhausting to weekly have to come up with a new intentional strategy to move the organization further. And I told my team, like, I don't think I've been more exhausted as an executive, as a leader, than I have been this year, and I think a lot of my friends I'm talking to are feeling that. They're feeling burned out a little bit and tired. And in my realm of trauma, I mean, imagine when we serve medical workers and first responders, right? The year that they've had, they all thought February, the vaccine comes out, it's over. Everybody thought that. And now here they're looking at their second Christmas of not being home, the second year in a row. It's one thing to sprint, and you think, if we can just sprint towards February, we'll make it. And now it's no, keep sprinting. And we'll tell you when to stop sprinting, but we don't really know, right? That's where we're at, right? Or imagine serving veterans and crap, what's going on in Afghanistan, and the debacle over there, and the feeling of, I lost friends, I lost ability, I was injured, I went through all this, and now I don't know what it accomplished. All that trauma. I mean, you think about even our audience that we're serving, on top of just the day-to-day, it's been an intense 18 months. And that's where, if it wasn't for my volunteers, y'all, I mean, if you're listening and you're a Reboot leader or member, I just want to thank you, because if it wasn't for you guys this past year, I think the organization would have came to a screeching halt, because I was redlined, and so for those of you who are leaders out there who don't feel like who are feeling alone right now, who don't feel like you've got a tribe of people who are running this with you, like I do with the volunteers, man, get involved in a round table, get involved in a mentor circle, get involved in something, and do it immediately. Because, you're no good to anybody once you burn out, and we want to help, maybe a Reboot group is where you need to go. I don't know, but Yeah, I just want to share that because I think a lot of executives are feeling that right now, man. I really do.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I mean that's what happens in the military.
Exactly.
There's a concept called stop loss. There's
Yes.
extended deployments. When we deploy here out of Tinker, it is very mundane or benign compared to these 6, 9, 12, 18-month deployments. We're only gone for a few weeks.
Right.
When COVID happened, those went from about 3 weeks worth of work to 8 or 9 weeks. We have crews coming and going every single week, but because of COVID, you had to go ROM, restriction of movement, somewhere and kind of quarantine 2 weeks before going out together.
Yeah.
And you're holed up somewhere, and I won't say where they were, but not the best facility, to then go on these extended deployments because if someone came down with COVID, that creates a whole problem for the crew. You've got a crew of 14 to however many people. And so then we had to generate extra crews in case crews went down because of COVID. So now you went and effectively more than doubled the time you were away, and then more than doubled the amount of crews that were available because of necessity. And you double pump these people through this process, and all of a sudden you've created this crisis. When you look at people coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, or wherever the heck else we've been for the last 20 years, and your time's up, your commitment's up, and they say, you know what? We don't care that your enlistment's over. We need you for another 18 months, and we really don't care.
Right.
Or you're on formally 6 months deployment for the Navy out on a ship, and you're gone.
Totally.
You pull into port, and it's a COVID port, and you can't really go anywhere, do anything, or cut loose or relax. And now you went from a 6-month deployment to a 9-month deployment or longer, based on what's going on, based on the needs of the people. So now your whole routine has shifted. Everything is much more strenuous. I was out in Bahrain when my family was over for Christmas and New Year's, and we went to Dubai for New Year's, which was just amazing. Not many people get the opportunity. Blessed for that. I landed back in Bahrain, and my phone was blowing up, and I'm like, what's going on? I was like, I'm not going to check those, right? I'm still on leave. I pulled up the newsreel, and we killed General Soleimani, the Iranian general, with a drone strike. Well, guess what? That's in my backyard. I'm in the Middle East. I've got to take these calls and see what's going on. I had to send my family back to the States, and I went on 100-hour work weeks to try, because we have an equivalent level commander on island 100-ish miles from Iran. That stuff happens, and your world is thrown into chaos. And then after we calm down for that, then COVID happened, and a whole new round of I won't say nonsense, but just the first time the world has collectively tried to fight a virus, and no one really knew what they were doing, and all the things that ensue from that. It is just, people are wore out, and we've got the automatic media that is in your face every day if you're on social or if you're listening to anything else, and we haven't had time to kind of regroup, recover, calm down, de-stress, relax, recharge, or whatever you want to say, whatever other R word we can throw in there. Recovery's not been a thing for the last 2-ish years, and people are wiped the heck out.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And I think that for when we look at this issue of empowering volunteers, I don't know how it's possible, but we have had more volunteers step forward this year than ever before. And I don't know where they find the juice. I don't. But man, I'm grateful for it. I mean, I'm so grateful, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are making a difference in these little communities all across the country. I mean, we've got, just so people know who are listening, the way Reboot works is the 12-week trauma healing course that meets one night per week for 12 weeks. And so it's led by local peers. And so each week they're getting together with their group, whether virtually or in person. They're kind of working through that stuff. And so most groups will meet 2 or 3 cycles, 12-week cycles per year. So you got to think that's 24 weeks minimum that you're committing to be there for at least 3 hours a night, plus your prep time of 2 or 3 hours, plus if anybody wants to call you during the week and chat one-on-one, right? So this is not a I'm going to join the local small group, or I'm going to stop by the VFW after work one night a week. I mean, this is the next level of commitment. And yet this year, I think more than ever, people are stepping forward and they're finding the energy somehow to say, we recognize the world is hurting. I have capacity. I can say no to some other things, and I can say yes to helping someone else right now. And that's the kind of person we look for, man, is people who are willing to say no to some creature comforts, who are willing to say no to some free time to be able to serve other people. And man, it's incredible. It really is. And so I don't know the secret. I'm not sure there is a secret to getting volunteers involved. I think a lot of people think, well, if I hire a volunteer recruiting coordinator, that'll fix it. But I have found that volunteerism, et cetera, has a lot more to do with the DNA of your organization that starts at the top than it has to do with programming or staff or whatever.
If you're going to hire someone to fix a problem and they haven't solved it in 13 months, that's because they don't even know the staff. They don't understand the programs yet.
And it's a little bit like trying to say, we're going to suddenly adopt this value of diversity as a culture. I see this in big companies. We're going to become diverse, but the core leaders don't really value diversity. So they appoint this head of diversity who kind of is chicken with their head cut off, running around trying to do a bunch of stuff about diversity. My point is, if you're going to be a diverse organization, it better start at the leadership level, believing that diversity is important. Because if it's not, to you, it won't really be important. It's empty. It's hollow. And that's what I feel. Maybe people feel like, I don't know, maybe they feel like volunteers are important. And that's what they say out of their mouth, but inside they don't really value them. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just brainstorming here on what it could be.
When we look at volunteers, whether you're a paid volunteer like joining the military or you're a volunteer at a nonprofit organization, from a leadership standpoint, you don't actually know what you have in the room until you get to know these people.
Right.
I've had friends that were in the military that joined day one, maybe a little bit later, right? Maybe 22 to 24 instead of right at 18. And they come in and they get treated like they don't know anything. And, maybe they worked contracting for the last 10 years with their family, and something comes up that they, no kidding, know the very minute details, how to execute, how to do all this stuff, but you discount what they have to say because you look at the rank on their shoulder or their collar and you're like, well, you don't know anything. This happens in the nonprofit world all the time. You've got a bunch of people come in and you're like, oh, this group is a little older. They've got 50 or 60 years crushing life. You don't know who they are, but you just
crushing life. Yeah.
But you don't know anything about them. They walk in as a volunteer and you have this kind of like, well, they're just volunteers. They're not paid staff. And because you have that attitude, you might have missed out on someone that always goes to volunteer at a place before they decide to give a few $1 million because they want to know what it's really like, boots on the ground or in, and they walk in there and you treat the volunteers like crap because they're volunteers. You might have lost out on $10 million, my friend. And I'm not saying that's the reason why you should treat your volunteers, but you just don't know what you have in the room until you get to know them.
That's right.
You really don't.
That's right. That's exactly right, man. Yeah. So good. That's so good. It's, yeah. I mean, volunteers are important. And, on the flip side, I think it's, volunteers are sometimes hard work. What's that quote? Is business would be great if it wasn't for the clients and the staff, is what somebody said once at a business, and I think that, for us, we don't have too many volunteers that are headaches. I mean, honestly, but I could see for some organizations, depending on the type of work they do, it could be just a huge undertaking. So, if your organization is not volunteer centric, that's okay. It doesn't have to be, but with your question, I think was how have we managed to do it? And I think that, that answers it.
Well, you did, right? You created leaders, you empowered them and you really did it. You didn't just say you were going to do it. You actually did it. And then surprise, surprise, you actually trained them in what they needed.
Right.
And most people don't do that. They don't replicate leaders. They're like, I'm the leader. You're not the leaders. I'm the leader.
Right.
I'm going to empower you to do this stuff, but really I'm going to micromanage everything you do. And then also, because we're so busy, I'm just not going to take the time to train you. They just told you that you can never be in charge, that you're not on a level playing field, and they don't have time for you or care about you. And you just said the complete opposite of all those things. You said you're replicating and building leaders, no kidding, empowering them and making sure they have the tools to be successful. You said exactly.
And then measuring those and cutting out those that aren't equipped.
Absolutely. So you
that's the other hard part. We have absolutely fired volunteers.
Yeah, but you do know the reason. Now you just got to take the transcript of this and then write it down and stick it on the wall. So then you know how to answer.
Now how we did it. But I mean, and we have standards for our volunteers, standards. We have codes of conduct for our volunteers. We have, all sorts of things within that. And but yeah, man, it's good discussion. It's good. It's encouraging. I'm encouraging myself. Like, we do have good volunteers. It's good. It's building myself up.
Yeah, you do. Don't forget it. You and Jenny have done a great job. You identified a problem. You dedicated your life to solving it. You didn't have to be the name in headlights, which you find may be a little hurting you a little bit now in the social media world where everyone's just me, look at me. You've cultivated a wonderful group of not just volunteers, but leaders that care and execute the mission in your absence.
And donors. I mean, we've got just, it's crazy. Our biggest donor is only 4% of our annual budget. So, I mean, we have tons of donors for an organization our size, tons. And they all give a little bit, man. Now I'd love if somebody's listening and wants to give us $1 million, we could use it. And we put it to work. But right now we've got a lot of dink and dunk kind of donor plays that are adding up to a lot of impact, a lot of money. So I think we treat our donors similar to how we treat our volunteers. We make them, it's interesting. One little nuance, and I'll shut up, but we have this tool we use. It's called Align. It's kind of like Traction, if you guys have ever used like EOS type systems, but it's a cultural kind of accountability system where we set clear numbers, we measure against them on a quarterly and annual basis, and everybody's responsible for their key metrics and reports in on that. And we use that internally, and it's been a game changer. We have a consultant named Lauren who we work with, who's been amazing. But speaking of which, if there's any nonprofits who, if you're an executive, side note, if you are laying at bed at night wondering what somebody in your team is working on, and you're like, what do they actually do here? Or why did they only get this amount done? Look into Align. I think it's like Align today. It's changed my life in terms of I sleep better at night, more accountability. You can email me, evan@rebootrecovery.com. I can hook you up with the consultant that we work with. Her name's Lauren. She's been incredible. And it's way less expensive than Traction. Side note, like a tenth of the cost, less expensive. So that's a side. But I say all this because within this Align system, one of the things that we do is we assign these key metrics to each team member, right? And they report back on those numbers to me. And it's been really helpful because volunteer, for example, counting new volunteers is one of those metrics, right? One of those metrics. And so it's within our organization, I think prioritizing what it is that we're measuring is something that also I don't think should be overlooked. And we were talking about like donors and things of that nature, adding new number of donors in that system. It's interesting. We actually call them all members. Whether you're a graduate, a leader, or a donor or a volunteer, you're considered a Reboot member. And we have a goal to serve X number of members per quarter and per year collective. And that number of members breaks down into number of volunteers, number of leaders, see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And by treating them like members, we basically, as soon as somebody donates, we start sending them tools, equipping them to help people in their community who might be hurting. We say like, hey, you're not just a donor. Sorry. We're going to equip you whether you want to or not. We're going to give you tools to be able to when your friend or your spouse or your neighbor or your church co-member or whoever it is has a suicidal flare and starts to feel suicidal, you're going to be able to know how to respond because you gave money to us and now we equipped you to be able to know how to respond. And that's a thing that I feel like my team has done well. That was not my idea. That was Jenny's idea, actually. And I think that's been a game changer for us, too, that even our donors are like in the mission, like they're not just giving. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
We've said a lot. And
yeah, I know we're over time. I know we don't have a time limit, but I know this is a lot of
There's no
content.
time
So
limit
thanks for
here,
listening.
Evan.
If you're still listening to this podcast, you're amazing.
They know. They're the only reason
Yeah.
I keep doing this thing, because so many people are just absolutely in love with my amazing guests or my voice.
And your
I don't know.
amazing voice, your sultry, relaxing tones.
This is another smooth evening with Travis
Yeah,
and Evan.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
No, this is
Delilah.
there you go. I need to get my team to create a little jingle for me. That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Uh,
Travis.
this has been such a great conversation, Evan. I really appreciate you, not only just the work that you do, but being able to come on the show and share some of the behind the scenes of what you do and how you do it and why you do it and how that's been driving you. I wanted to give you a minute for just one more plug, because I know you've got an app that you guys are developing or something of that nature called My Reboot. What is that? What's that all about?
My Reboot's just it's a platform for content for people who want to access the Premier Library for trauma healing content. And so they can go to our website, rebootrecovery.com. They could learn how to register to attend a course if they're hurting or know someone who is, whether that's a veteran, first responder, or anybody who's gone through trauma. We have courses for all of them nationwide around the country. We've got 300 plus courses, so sign up for one of those. If you want to get involved in leading, do that. If you want to use Reboot as part of your model, maybe you run a nonprofit that works with homeless, or you work with abused women, or you work with children, or whatever it is, call us, reach out to us. Let's start a conversation about partnering up. We'd love to align. We don't do a lot of things. We only do one thing, which is trauma healing courses led by peers. That's all that we do. And so we're not going to interfere with your lane. We want to come alongside of you in what you're doing. And then the My Reboot platform, what it does is it serves as a library for individuals, but primarily it serves as an aftercare solution for other more intensive interventions. So let's say you're listening and you do a 3-day retreat program, but after that, you're not really sure exactly what happens at 60, 90, 170 days, whatever it is, with the people that went through your retreat. Our My Reboot platform can help solve that by staying in touch with those people, continuing to do, giving them good content to help them heal. And then we can report that back to you to show you what the longitudinal, that's a SAT word, what the longitudinal outcomes are of your impact. And so you can check that out on our website as well, rebootrecovery.com. And if you want to ask any direct questions, you can email me, Evan, EVAN, at rebootrecovery.com, and myself or Jess from my team, Jess Hall, will respond to you. And thank you for listening.
Just one final request. This is just for me. Can you take longitudinal and turn that into a jingle?
You know what? I can. It's going to be tricky to find some words that rhyme with longitudinal, though. I'm going to toss that out there. I don't know what word rhymes with longitudinal, but I'll work on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll expect that for your homework for the week. Hey, if you love the show and you love what we do and you want to do something like this, we actually have a team dedicated to helping you get your podcast, your show launched and on a success like we're doing. Give us a shout. Check us out at nonprofitarchitect.org. Thanks again. And thank you, Evan.
Thank you.